At 77, Steven Tyler, the electric, leather-clad voice of Aerosmith, has become almost unrecognizable, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The man who once screamed life into every corner of the stage now seems to be fighting a battle that fans never saw coming. Once the poster child for rock and roll excess, resilience, and raw charisma, Tyler has quietly vanished from the spotlight, and the silence has been deafening. For years he defied age, addiction, and tragedy, only to now face a storm that even he couldn't sing his way through. Behind the eyeliner, scarves, and swagger was always a fragile soul. One who has endured decades of physical pain, personal loss, and the exhausting weight of fame. But at 77, something changed. Tour dates were suddenly canceled. Rumors swirled. His bandmates offered vague statements. And then nothing. No press, no appearances. Just a chilling stillness from one of rock's most vibrant spirits. Steven Tyler's health has always been a delicate topic, masked behind decades of theatrics, screams, and stage dives. For the public, he was immortal, a rock god who never aged, never slowed, never stopped. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more sobering. Long before he turned 77, Tyler was already battling a series of crippling physical ailments that would eventually bring even the strongest performer to his knees. Years of intense touring, vocal strain, and substance abuse had left deep scars. Multiple foot surgeries, caused by years of high-energy performances in platform boots, left him in chronic pain. His feet, twisted and damaged from decades of dancing and jumping on stage, required not just surgical correction but full rehabilitation, often forcing him into prolonged periods of rest. But it wasn't just the physical injuries. Tyler's well-documented history with addiction began as early as the 1970s. Despite numerous stints in rehab and long periods of sobriety, relapse always lingered like a shadow. In 2022, Aerosmith had to cancel their Las Vegas residency after Tyler voluntarily entered a treatment program following foot surgery. The pain medication had reopened a door he had fought so hard to keep closed. Though fans admired his honesty and bravery, the cancellation raised serious concerns. Was this just a stumble, or the beginning of a final decline? As the years wore on, Tyler's public appearances grew fewer. Interviews became rarer. Photos of him began circulating, thin, pale, visibly aged. He no longer resembled the wild rock icon with feathers in his hair, but a fragile man quietly wrestling with age and pain. And then the silence. By mid-2024, Tyler had all but vanished from the public eye. Band members offered only cryptic statements. "He's taking time for himself," one said. "We're giving him space," said another. Fans speculated. Was he terminally ill? Did he have Parkinson's or dementia? Or had he simply had enough of fame? Some insiders close to the Aerosmith circle hinted at deeper issues: emotional trauma, unresolved family tensions, and a feeling of disconnection from the very industry he once ruled. Tyler, ever the emotional performer, had always carried his heart close to the surface. Every lyric he screamed, every tear he wiped on stage, none of it was ever fake. So when life became too heavy, it wasn't surprising that he chose solitude over spectacle. And yet it hurt. For fans who grew up with Dream On and I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, the absence of Steven Tyler felt like losing a part of their own youth. The man who once survived overdose, heartbreak, and near-death experiences was now simply gone. And perhaps most heartbreaking of all was the way it happened, not with a bang, but with a whisper. A quiet slipping away, one canceled show at a time. But this was only the beginning. Because what came next, what Steven finally admitted to those closest to him, shattered every illusion of rock star invincibility. The decision to walk away from the spotlight wasn't just about painkillers or aging bones. It was far more personal. Steven Tyler, the man who once stood before crowds of 50,000 with arms wide open and a voice that could crack the sky, was now retreating, not out of weakness, but heartbreak. For decades, the stage had been his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself, forget the tragedies, and channel every scar into song. But at 77, even the sanctuary had begun to feel hollow. The roar of the crowd couldn't drown out the silence he felt when the curtains closed. For the first time in his life, music couldn't save him. Behind the scenes, Steven had been quietly enduring something that few fans knew: deep emotional wounds that never fully healed. One of the hardest moments came with the growing distance between him and his own bandmates. Though Aerosmith always projected unity, the truth was more fractured. Internal disagreements, creative tensions, and years of clashing egos had taken their toll. Tyler, the flamboyant frontman, often felt isolated from the very group he helped make legendary. And while the public saw them as brothers in arms, the band's dynamic had grown strained, sometimes even cold. But there was something even more painful eating away at him: his relationship with his children. Over the years, his relentless touring and chaotic lifestyle had left him feeling like a guest in the lives of his daughters. Liv Tyler, now a star in her own right, once hinted in interviews that their relationship was complicated, even distant during her early years. And while they reconciled later in life, the guilt of missed birthdays, absent milestones, and broken promises never left Steven. As he aged, those regrets started to weigh heavier than the applause ever could. He began to question whether all the fame was worth the personal sacrifices. Then came the incident that seemed to change everything. In late 2023, during what was supposed to be Aerosmith's farewell tour, Tyler suffered a frightening vocal injury during a show. Witnesses described the moment as chilling. His voice cracked mid-song, and he winced, clutching his throat before rushing off stage. The performance was cut short, and the remaining shows were immediately canceled. What was first described as a minor issue was later revealed to be a serious vocal cord tear, one that could permanently impact his ability to sing. For someone like Steven Tyler, that wasn't just a medical diagnosis, it was a death sentence for his soul. Singing wasn't just his job, it was his identity. The thought of never belting out another high note, never losing himself in the music again, broke him. And as he sat in silence, recovering from surgery and therapy, he began to withdraw emotionally. Friends say he stopped answering calls. He stopped writing music. He barely spoke. For a man who once couldn't stop talking, even when microphones were off, this silence was terrifying. And yet, perhaps this was the first time in his life Steven was truly listening to his body, to his heart, to the quiet voice that told him he was tired. Not just physically, but emotionally exhausted from decades of performing, pretending, and pushing through pain. Walking away wasn't just about a torn voice or aging legs. It was about reclaiming the fragments of himself that fame had slowly stripped away. Steven Tyler has always been a man of confessions. Whether on stage, in interviews, or behind closed doors, he wore his heart on his sleeve, even when it was cracked and bleeding. But in the quiet years that followed his public withdrawal, it was the confessions within his own family that cut the deepest. Beneath the feathers, scarves, and iconic screeches was a man haunted by the faces of the ones he loved the most, and the moments he could never get back. At 77, as the world questioned his absence, Tyler was facing an internal reckoning with the people who knew him not as a rock star, but as a flawed and wounded father. The relationship between Steven and his daughter Liv Tyler was always complicated. For years, Liv believed another man was her biological father. It wasn't until she was a teenager that she discovered the truth, that the man she idolized from afar, the lead singer of Aerosmith, was in fact her real dad. Tyler wasn't there for the earliest years of her life, and although they eventually built a bond, the weight of that lost time hung over them like a cloud. Liv has spoken publicly about the confusion, the betrayal, and the longing she felt as a child. And Steven, to his credit, never denied it. He owned his mistakes, but regret has a way of festering with age. And as he entered his late 70s, those ghosts returned with greater intensity. Tyler's other children, too, have had their own journeys through the chaos of his fame. Mia Tyler, his second daughter, has been candid about growing up with a father who was both larger than life and often painfully absent. In interviews and memoirs, she has described her upbringing as being marked by both adoration and resentment, caught in the orbit of a man who was always chasing the next high, the next tour, the next applause. And while Tyler loved his children deeply, he often struggled to prioritize them during the peak of his career. The road always called louder than the nursery. What made this phase of his life even more tragic was how aware Steven became of his failings. In the stillness of recovery, when the stage lights were gone and the crowds had stopped cheering, he was left alone with the memories. Not of sold-out arenas, but of missed school plays, broken promises, and long-distance phone calls that came too late. Sources close to the family have revealed that in recent years, Stephen began reaching out more frequently, trying to mend what time had frayed. He would send letters, voice recordings, even old photos with tearful notes attached. It was a man's final attempt to rewrite his own legacy, not through music, but through love. But it hasn't been easy. Some wounds remain tender, and not all relationships have healed fully. The process has been slow and often painful. Family gatherings have become more intimate, less performative. Friends say Stephen has broken down in tears during simple moments, watching his grandchildren play, flipping through old photo albums, or hearing his daughters talk about their own struggles. It's as if he's seeing everything for the first time, and realizing how much he missed. At 77, Steven Tyler is no longer the untouchable rock god. He is simply a man, a father, a grandfather, and a soul desperately trying to connect before it's too late. His family's confessions weren't meant to shame him. They were echoes of pain asking to be heard. And in finally listening, Tyler is beginning to find something he's been searching for his whole life: peace. But what comes next may be the most emotional part of all. Because while some believe Stephen is fading into obscurity, others insist he's quietly preparing for something. Perhaps not a comeback, but a final message to the world. In the shadows of retirement, where most stars choose silence, Steven Tyler has been whispering, through fleeting appearances, cryptic messages, and quiet creative bursts that only those closest to him have witnessed. Though many fans fear that his absence signals the end, there are subtle signs that Stephen isn't done yet, not entirely. The man who once screamed into microphones and commanded massive stages may never return in the same form. But a quieter, more introspective version of him has started to emerge. The question now isn't just whether Steven Tyler is making a comeback, but whether he's preparing for a final goodbye. On his own terms, in early 2025, a blurry photo surfaced online. Stephen at a small recording studio in Maui, barefoot, gray hair tied back, surrounded by a few close friends. The image sparked a wave of speculation. Was he recording new music? Writing a memoir? Planning a surprise farewell performance? No official statements followed, but those who knew him best said he had found solace in small things, playing piano alone at night, journaling lyrics in notebooks, revisiting songs that never made it to albums. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about legacy. One longtime friend described it best. Stephen is finally doing it for himself. No audience, no expectations, just his soul and the sound. That in itself was a transformation. For a man who once needed the validation of millions, Steven Tyler had begun to shed the armor he wore for 5 decades. The glitz, the feathers, the showmanship. It was never fake, but it was never the full story either. Beneath the spectacle was always a boy from Yonkers who just wanted to be seen, to be loved, to matter. In recent months, Stephen has also grown closer to his bandmates again, particularly Joe Perry, with whom he shared a famously volatile relationship. The Toxic Twins, once torn apart by ego and addiction, have reportedly begun healing their bond in private. Not with tour buses and sold-out arenas, but with long phone calls and shared memories. It's not about rekindling Aerosmith, it's about ending things right, with love rather than bitterness. There have also been whispers of a final project in the works. A stripped-down, raw acoustic album filled with unreleased tracks and emotional reflections. Nothing flashy. No promotional tour. Just one last gift to his fans, a musical memoir of sorts. Whether it ever sees the light of day is unknown. Tyler is taking his time, unpressured by labels or deadlines. It's a deeply personal process, and perhaps that's the point. As for public appearances, they remain rare. But when he does show up, at a friend's charity concert or backstage at a Broadway show, he is often seen smiling, if a bit tired. Still stylish, still Stephen, but with a gentler energy, as though he knows something we don't. As though he's already made peace with his journey. For fans, it's bittersweet. We may never see the wild, screaming frontman again, but what we're witnessing now is arguably more profound. The slow, graceful descent of a legend who once lived life at full speed. Steven Tyler isn't vanishing, he's evolving. From chaos to clarity, from performer to poet, from icon to human, and maybe, just maybe, this quiet season isn't a goodbye, but a different kind of encore. One sung not with a microphone, but with memory, vulnerability, and heart. After all, Steven Tyler's voice was never just about volume, it was about truth. And now, in the stillness of age, he may be singing the most honest verse of his life. So what really happened to Steven Tyler? Why did he retreat from the world? Is this a moment of healing, or the final curtain call for a man whose voice defined generations? Stay with us, because the truth behind Steven Tyler's disappearance will leave you heartbroken.